E te iwi whakapono, tēnā koutou, to the family of faith. Greetings. I want to talk today about remembering and forgetting. I'm not sure if it's because I'm getting old, but I've been thinking quite a bit recently about the importance of remembering things. As I record this message, I'm thinking about my daughter being born a long time ago, our eldest daughter. I'm remembering that because of the fact that she is at the moment waiting to give birth herself. Sometime in the next day or two, we're expecting her second child to arrive, and that's maybe prompted me to think back to when we were awaiting her arrival. And I remember talking to an elderly couple in our church at that time, and they were asking me how Lorraine was doing. And this was a very interesting couple. They'd been missionaries in China during the 1930s and 40s, right in the inner back blocks of China, miles from anywhere. And man, they had some fascinating stories to tell. Bandits and you name it, they had experienced some amazing things. And sometimes you would look at this couple and think, this frail old couple, could they really have experienced all of those things, gone through all of those things, survived all of those things? They were remarkable people. They'd been there right through the Japanese invasion of China and World War II. And anyway, this lady asked me how Lorraine was doing, and I said, well, she's doing pretty well, I think, all things considered. She is a little bit concerned about the fact that we live so far from the hospital. We were maybe not an hour's drive, but a reasonable distance from the hospital, and it was a bit of a concern for Lorraine. Would we make it on time or not? And this lady looked at me with a wry smile, and she said, when I gave birth to our first child, we were 4 days' walk from the nearest midwife. I went home and told Lorraine that. I'm sure it helped her, made her feel much more relaxed. The other thing I remember, though, about this couple was the man's favourite biblical verse. I'm sure it was his favourite verse because he quoted it so often. I remember him often standing in church and saying these words, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, forget not his benefits." Psalm 103 verse 2. Bless the Lord, O my soul, forget not his benefits. Don't forget God's blessings, God's goodness, God's faithfulness. That's a recurring theme throughout the scriptures, particularly the Old Testament. Remember, don't forget. I don't know if this has ever occurred to you, but when I read through the story of the Exodus, in the book of Exodus and also in Deuteronomy, when I read that story of God bringing his people out of captivity in Egypt and on the journey to the promised land, I often find myself thinking, how come these people were so thick? They were idiots. They just didn't seem to learn. They had all of these experiences of seeing the miraculous power of God. They'd seen him bring these plagues on the people of Egypt in order that they would let them go. They'd seen him open the Red Sea and allow them to go through in safety. They'd seen him provide food and water, everything they needed on the journey. And yet, the minute Moses, their leader, goes up the mountain to talk to God, what do? They make an idol out of gold, a calf to worship. And that seems to be the way they acted the whole way through this journey. They just keep on doing stupid things, despite all they've seen and all they've experienced of God's power and protection and blessing. They don't remember, and so they choose to do something stupid. What's wrong with these people, I find myself thinking? How can they be so crazy? Listen to these words from Deuteronomy chapter 8 verses 1 to 18 and listen for the words remember and don't forget. So this is Moses talking to the people. Deuteronomy 8. Be careful to obey all the commands I'm giving you today. Then you will live and multiply, and you will enter and occupy the land the Lord swore to give your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you through the wilderness for these 40 years, humbling you and testing you to prove your character and to find out whether or not you would obey his commands. Yes, he humbled you by letting you go hungry and then feeding you with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. He did it to teach you that people do not live by bread alone. Rather, we live by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. For all these 40 years, your clothes did not wear out. Your feet didn't blister or swell. Think about it. Just as a parent disciplines a child, the Lord your God disciplines you for your own good. So obey the commands of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, flowing with streams and pools of water, with fountains and springs that gush out in the valleys and hills. It is a land of wheat and barley, of grapevines, fig trees and pomegranates, of olive oil and honey. It is a land where food is plentiful and nothing is lacking. It is a land where iron is as common as stone, and copper is abundant in the hills. When you have eaten your fill, be sure to praise the Lord your God for the good land he's given you. But that is the time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations, and decrees that I'm giving you today. For when you've become full and prosperous and have built fine homes to live in, and when your flocks and herds have become very large, and your silver and gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud at that time, and do not forget the Lord your God, who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. Do not forget that he led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions, where it was so hot and dry. He gave you water from the rock. He fed you with manna in the wilderness, a food unknown to your ancestors. He did this to humble you and test you for your own good. He did all this so you would never say to yourself, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful. In order to fulfill the covenant he confirmed to your ancestors with an oath. You hear that repeated warning? Remember, remember, don't forget, remember, don't forget. But they kept on forgetting when it mattered the most, when they most needed to rely on God and trust him. They forgot his faithfulness. They forgot what he'd done, and they try and sort it out for themselves. They kept on making the same mistake over and over again. How come they were so incredibly stupid? And then, the more I think about it, I realize maybe I'm not so different. I've seen God's provision, I've seen his power, I've seen his miracles. And yet, each time a new challenge comes, a new struggle, something that I have to deal with, it's very easy to forget that God is trustworthy, that God has proven himself to me. It's very easy to think, how do I sort out this problem? What's my plan? What's my timetable? You know, God gave his people a whole lot of festivals, great celebrations. And each year, still today, these festivals are carried out. Passover, the Festival of Shelters, and so on. Their purpose? It's to help the people remember, to get them to reenact the stories of God's power, God's faithfulness, God's miracles, to pass them on to their children so they wouldn't forget. Forget not his benefits. Jesus took one of those, the festival of Passover, and he gave it to us, the people of the new covenant. We call it communion. It's to enable us to reenact and remember, to pass on the story of his crucifixion and his resurrection, to remember all he's done for us, to remember the great story. We need marker points. We need things that regularly remind us, oh yeah, that's right. This is the God we serve. We need those marker points particularly in times of crisis and confusion and chaos. We need them for ourselves in our own lives as well as the great story of faith. I wonder, what are your marker points? What are the stories, the experiences, the miracles that you go back to and remind yourself, yeah, that's right. This is the God I serve. We're so prone when we face difficulty to make our own plans. We forget all his benefits. And it's just as important as a community to do that. I touched on this a little bit last week, and if you watched Steve Ward's Thought for the Day on Tuesday this week, you'll have been reminded of a marker point in the story of Eastview Baptist Church. Those stones that are outside the church building, which are a reminder of where we've come from, how the story began and what it meant and what its significance was. A marker point for us. Don't forget. Individually, as families and as a church community, when we're faced with challenges, when we're faced with uncertainty, it's really, really important that we remember. And on the basis of that remembering, as I said last week, that we trust God, that we choose to rely on his faithfulness, that we do it his way, rather than deciding, well, I better sort this out because I don't think God can handle it. Do it his way because you remember what he's done in the past. So remembering is really important. Biblically, it's really important. But there's at least one time in the Bible when we're told that forgetting is a good thing. The Apostle Paul, writing to the Philippian church in verse 3, verses 12 to 14, we read, I don't mean to say that I've already achieved these things or that I've already reached perfection, but I press on to possess that perfection for which Jesus Christ first possessed me. No, dear brothers and sisters, I've not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past, and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. Forgetting the past. Isn't that interesting? I don't think Paul is talking about losing your memory. I don't think he's talking about literally not being able to remember something that happened before. I think he's saying there is a time when it's important to let go of the past. There's a time when it's important to put that aside and to focus on moving forward into the new future that God has for you. There's a time for forgetting. There's a time for letting go of the past and focusing on looking forward. I wonder if now is such a time for Eastview Baptist Church. Yes, it's important to remember, to give thanks, to learn the lessons of what's gone before. But also there's a time for forgetting, letting go of the past, looking and moving forward into the future. A time for remembering and a time for forgetting. You know, a key question I've had in my head over the past number of years, maybe 10 years or so, and I referred to it a little bit a few weeks back. The key question for me is, what is the Christian church in New Zealand going to look like? How's church going to be, say in 10 years' time? What are things, how are things going to change? If you like to use gospel language, what are the new wineskins that we've got to start using because we've got new situations to deal with? Well, why? Why do I ask that question? Why am I thinking about that question so much? It's because the old wineskins aren't working. The old ways of doing things aren't working. We've got to try something new. Things have got to be different. Here's some statistics from the 2018 census. People who put themselves down as Christian, 1.65 million. Okay, Christian, 1.65 million. People who put themselves down as no religion, 2.26 million. 48.2% of our population recorded themselves in the last census as no religion. And among those who stated they did have a religious affiliation, 4,248 said they were members of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Over 20,000 listed themselves as Jedi. These latest statistics simply reinforce what's been happening for many years now in our land and across the Western world. Numbers are dropping. People who claim a belief in God, who claim a Christian conviction, who are involved in a church, the numbers have been dropping rapidly. And these latest statistics just reinforce that. What I think is of greater concern is that of those 1.65 million who say they are Christian, a huge percentage of them have no regular church affiliation. They don't belong to a church, they don't attend a church. And of those who do, a very large percentage are very spasmodic in their link, in their attendance at a church. And that's what's got me thinking, asking, wondering over this last decade. What's going on and why is that the case, and how do we need to work to change it? Now, I have to say I'm not worried. I'm not worried about the future of the church. Jesus has promised that he will build his church, and I believe him. So I'm not worried about the future. I believe Jesus is building his church and will build his church here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I just want to make sure that the church that I'm putting my time and my energy and my resources into trying to build, that church is part of the church Jesus is building. That I'm not building something over here and really Jesus is at work over there. Do you get what I'm saying? I want to make sure that where I'm investing is actually the church that Jesus is building. Let me share a little bit of my personal journey relating to this over the last maybe 2 or 3 years. A couple of years ago, the Baptist family of churches organised what they called listening hui. They were held throughout the country, and there was opportunity for anybody who wanted to go and meet with some representatives of the leadership of the Baptist churches, and just to share what they were concerned about and what they thought needed to happen as we looked to the future. So I went to one of these listening hui, the one that was closest to where I was living. I have to say I didn't go with great enthusiasm because I've been to things like this many times before, but I went. As I sat there that evening and I listened to people talk, my strong sense was you're trying to answer the wrong question. The question that people were trying to answer was, how do we enable the Baptist church, the Baptist denomination to survive and to grow? Now that may seem an important question, but it's not the question. The question is, how do we help see the kingdom of God established on earth? That's the question. And then maybe a subsidiary question is what might the part be of the Baptist church in seeing that come to pass? But that's the question. How do we see the kingdom of God established on earth more and more? What is the future that we need to be and that we are called to be moving into? And I have felt that God has been saying to me over the last couple of years that I need to listen more and talk less. Now that might surprise you because you probably think I talk a lot. But that's what I've sensed God saying. Why? Well, because personally, I'm really quite happy with the old wineskins, the way the church is. I like it, it suits me, I'm used to it, I'm comfortable in it. But it's not achieving what it's designed for, what it's called to, what it's created for. Think again of those statistics. We are not achieving what the church is meant to be achieving. And it's not enough, I don't think, just to try to do the same things better. It's not enough just to work harder, to put more effort into evangelism. I don't think it's even enough to pray more. Now, all of those things will help, but I believe there's some basic things that need to change. We need to find out what are the new wineskins for this time. What are the new things you are doing, Jesus? And how do we join in with you? And here's why I think Jesus has been telling me, and maybe others in my generation, to listen some more and talk less. As we face these big questions, I realise that my answers, my generation's answers to those questions will come from our experience, what we know, what we've been through, what we've learned. In recent years, I felt a few times that God has said to me, just shut up and listen. When I've been in situations where particularly younger people, younger leaders have been suggesting things, coming up with ways of trying out new things in church life, and my immediate response has been to say, oh, that won't work. And on each of those times, I felt God say to me, just shut up and listen. Just listen. And as I've listened, and as I've gone away and thought about it and prayed about it, I've thought, actually, that might work. Actually, that's worth a try. So again, my question is, Jesus, what are you doing? And how do we join in with that? Who do I need to give opportunity to speak to those questions? When Jesus talked about new wineskins, he said something that I had never noticed until quite recently. It's one of those times where you read the Bible and you think, has this always been there? Or has someone just added that recently? The accounts of Jesus talking about new wine and new wineskins, they're pretty much identical in Matthew and Mark. But Luke adds something that's not in the other two Gospels, and I'd never noticed it. No one puts new wine into old wineskins. This is Jesus speaking as recorded in Luke. No one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the new wine would burst the wineskins, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. New wine must be stored in new wineskins. Now that's pretty much what's written in Matthew and Mark as well. But then listen to this. Jesus' words. But no one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new wine. The old is just fine, they say. It's Luke 5. No one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new wine. The old is just fine, they say. I find that such a challenging statement at this stage of my life. Now, please hear me. I'm not being critical of the Christian church. I love the church. And I love this Baptist family of churches that we're part of. I've been a Baptist all my life. I've been a Baptist literally longer than I've been a Christian. But I'm just trying to listen to what God is saying in this time. I'm just trying to look for what God is doing and then join in with that, rather than thinking, let's just carry on with the way it's always been. And as I said earlier, I do wonder if this time we're in now is an ideal time for Eastview to really think about, okay, God, what are you saying? What's ahead for us? Where to from here? It feels like we're entering a new season. God, what do you want that to look like? And what's the direction for us to take? Rather than just saying, let's carry on as we always have. Now, I don't know the answers to all the questions. I don't. The general questions and the Eastview specific questions. And my purpose is not to unsettle you or make you uneasy. It's bad enough in the middle of COVID to feel like nothing is very definite anymore. But I do want to encourage you to think. I and my generation are probably not going to be the ones who come up with the answers to the questions the church faces. But we need to be willing to acknowledge the questions, and we need to listen for possible answers as the next generations come up with potential answers. And we need to allow space and permission for those possible answers to be tried. Because what I think, what I like, what I want isn't necessarily right. There's still place for experience and wisdom, absolutely. Those of later generations like myself, we've still got some words to contribute to the conversation. But what I think, what I like, that's not necessarily going to be right. That's been my learning over the past 2 or 3 years. I do not want to be one who just keeps on saying the old ways, what I'm used to, what I like, the way I've done it, the way I would do it. The old wine is just fine, thank you. So my sense is, as Eastview moves into a new season with new possibilities and new uncertainties, my sense is, yes, this is a time for remembering, for looking back and reflecting on all of the signs, all of the experiences we have of God's goodness, God's faithfulness, God's power, absolutely. But maybe it's also a time for some forgetting, for letting go of the way things have been and exploring the way things might be. The Lord bless you all.